This is part 23 of Entity Framework tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss many-to-many relationship with code first approach. This is continuation to part 22. In part 22, we discussed many-to-many relationship with database first approach. In this video, we will be modifying the example that we started in part 22. So please watch part 22 before proceeding. With code first, we usually write our classes first. So here we've got student and course classes. Notice that within the student class, along with student ID and student name properties, we also have courses property that returns collection of course objects. A student can enroll into multiple courses. So to get the list of all the courses that a given student has enrolled into, this property is going to return that list. Courses, look at the return type, it's a collection of course objects. In a similar fashion, a given course can have multiple students enrolled. So to get the list of all students enrolled in a given course, we use the students property that is returning a collection of student objects. So there is a many-to-many relationship between these two classes. Now, based on these classes, we want the entity framework to be able to generate these three database tables. We want the course ID column to be primary key within courses table, student ID to be the primary key within students table, and we want this bridge table also to be generated, and the name of the table should be student courses, and the names of the columns within these table should be student ID and course ID. Together these two columns should form the primary key of this table, and student ID should be the foreign key referencing students table and student ID column. Similarly, course ID should be the foreign key referencing courses table and course ID column. Let's see how to achieve this. Let's flip to Visual Studio. This is the example that we worked with in the previous session. This employee model was generated using the database first approach, so let's go ahead and delete that first. And then from the web.config file, let's delete this connection string that's auto-generated by the entity framework. So to this project, let's add a class file and let's call this course.cs. And this course class is going to contain course ID, course name, and students properties. So let's paste them there. And at the moment, notice that we have a compilation error. That's basically because we don't have the student class yet. So let's go ahead and add another class file and let's call this student.cs. And this class is going to contain student ID, student name, and courses properties. Let's add another class file to this project and let's call this one employee db context.cs. And we want this employee db context class to be inheriting from db context class, which is present in system.data.entity namespace. So let's go ahead and bring that in. And this employee db context class is going to contain two properties, and one of the property is going to return db set of course objects. And let's call the property courses. In a similar fashion, we are going to have another property which is going to return db set of student objects, and let's call the property students. And within web.config file, let's include the connection string. So within the connection string, notice that the name of the database is sample. Alright, at the moment we already have the sample database, so let's go ahead and delete that sample database. Now when we run this web application, it should automatically create the sample database and all the required tables. Now if you notice, we haven't changed webform1.aspx and its code behind in any way from the previous session. It's exactly the same code that we have written in the previous session. Now let's save all these changes. Let's go ahead and run webform1.aspx. Now we are going to get a runtime error, but in spite of that runtime error, sample database and the required tables will automatically be created. In a bit we'll see how to resolve this runtime error, but first let's go ahead and check if the sample database is created. Notice that the database is there, and we also have the tables courses, students, and student courses. Okay, that's how we want the tables to be named, and that's how they are named. And if you look at students table, and if you look at the columns, we have got student ID. Student ID is the primary key there, and student name property is also there. And if you look at courses, we have course ID and course name. Course ID is the primary key. Now if we look at student courses tables, notice that the columns are not named like how we want them to be named. So we want the columns to be named student ID and course ID, but if you look at the columns here, it says student underscore student ID, course underscore course ID. So that's not how we want them to be. We want them to be student ID and course ID. And another thing, notice that student ID and course ID together, they form the primary key for this table. Student ID is the foreign key and course ID is a foreign key. Okay, so the naming is not how we want it. So let's see how to customize it. To customize it, we need to use Fluent API. Okay, so we are going to override on model creating method, and look at the code right here. It's very straightforward. Now we are starting with student entity. We can also start with course entity, but I just chosen to start with student entity. And then we are saying student can have many courses. Okay, using this has many method. So that is one end of the relationship. Okay, student can have many courses. Similarly, a course can have many students. So that's the second end of the relationship, and we are specifying that with many function. Okay, so courses can have many students. Similarly, student can have many courses. And then the bridge table that is going to be generated should be named student courses, and to specify that we are using toTable method. Okay, and look at this, we're using here map left key and map right key methods. Now this is very important. Now notice that we have started with student table here, student entity here. So left key is going to be student ID. Okay, the primary key of that table. So within student courses, student ID will be the first column, okay, which is going to reference student ID column from the student table, and the right key will be course ID, which will be referencing courses table, course ID column within courses table. Okay, so straightforward code there. So let's flip to Visual Studio, and let's get to this employee DB context, and we want to override on model creating method. And to speed things up, I have already typed the required code, so let's copy and paste it right here, and let's format this. Okay, so with these changes, let's first delete this sample database, and we also need to fix this runtime error. This error is basically because of this line right here. Okay, now to fix this, whatever result this LINQ query is going to return, we are going to convert that result to a list. And that's what the error says. We need to use that toList method basically to resolve that error. Okay, so with these changes, let's run the web form. Now we should not get that runtime error, and the sample database and required table should be created with the conventions that we have specified. So we don't have the runtime error. Now let's go to the SQL Server Management Studio, refresh databases. So notice that we have sample database there, and we also have the three tables. Now courses, if you look at that table, we have course ID, course name columns, and students have got student ID and student name columns, and student courses have got student ID and course ID. Look at the names. Again, student ID, course ID together, they form the primary key of this table, and they are foreign keys as well. Alright, at the moment the web form doesn't display any data because we don't have any data within the tables. So let's go ahead and execute this insert script to insert some test data, and let's reload this web form. Notice that Mike is enrolled in C# and ASP.NET courses. John is enrolled in C#, ASP.NET, and SQL Server courses. Now at the moment, Mike is not in WCF course. Let's say we want to assign him to WCF course. So when we click this button, that should happen. Again, the code has not changed in any way on this web form 1.aspx. But when we click this button, we are going to get a runtime error. Look at the error. It says object reference not set to an instance of an object, and that is at line number 31. So let's see what's actually happening there. So let's go to line number 31. And if you notice, what's happening here is, look at that. First of all, we want to enroll Mike into WCF course. So we need to retrieve the WCF course itself. That's what we are doing here. So we have the WCF course, and then we are loading, Mike student object. Mike student ID is 1, so we are retrieving the student object, and then we are trying to load the courses of Mike, and then to that collection we are going to add WCF course. But then here, by default the navigation property data is not loaded. We have to tell the entity framework to load courses details as well when we load the students. And the way we do that is by using include method. So we're saying along with students include courses data as well. So we need to specify the name of the navigation property. So when the student is loaded, the respective courses are loaded as well, so that this property will not be null, and to that collection we can add the WCF course, which means that particular student will have WCF course assigned. In this case, Mike will have WCF course assigned. In a similar fashion, when we remove, when we click this button, remove John from SQL Server course, again we are going to run into the same problem. So to fix that, along with the students, we want to include the data for courses navigation property as well. Alright, so with these changes, let's run the web form. So there we have the data. Now when we click assign WCF course to Mike, so let's reload the web form. Notice that WCF course is assigned to Mike. And then when we click remove John from SQL Server course, SQL Server course should be removed. So let's click the button. Let's reload the web form. Notice that it works exactly the same way as before. Here we're using the code first approach. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.